What happens when the greatest leader your nation has ever known just, well, suddenly dies?
Oh, man.
Right. And the only people left to fill his, like, massive shoes are a generation that's basically addicted to taking the easy way out.
Yeah, that is a terrifying scenario.
Think about that for a second. You inherit this incredible legacy, sprawling enterprise, but the visionary founder who actually held the whole thing together is gone.
Right, the guy who did all the heavy lifting.
Exactly. The locked doors, the unfinished projects, they are entirely yours to manage now.
It is, it's the ultimate stress test, right? For any organization or community, or even just an individual psyche.
Yeah.
Do you maintain that fierce resolve of the original vision, or do you start cutting corners the absolute second things get difficult?
And we are answering that exact question today in this deep dive. We're looking at a stack of excerpts from a Hebrew-English Bible and really zooming in on this ancient, incredibly brutal text.
The Book of Judges.
Yeah. The Book of Judges. Yes. Our mission today is to extract practical, modern life lessons from this record of the Canaanite conquest.
What is packed with them, by the way?
Oh, absolutely. Because the legendary leader Joshua, the guy who literally watched the walls of Jericho fall, he's just died. And the central question for the Israelites is staring them in the face in the very first verse. They ask, who shall go up for us first?
Which, that is a profoundly vulnerable question to ask when you're in a leadership vacuum.
Totally.
What these source texts provide is, well, it's essentially a masterclass in behavioral psychology and crisis management.
Yeah.
They lay out this stark, uncompromising look at the mechanics behind stunning, decisive victories and, on the flip side, devastating generational failures.
Right. And here's the part of the text that absolutely fascinated me right out of the gate. Before we see the downward spiral, we get a glimpse of what successful leadership actually looks like.
Yeah, that initial momentum.
Exactly. So the Israelites ask God who should lead the charge, and the answer is the tribe of Judah. And the text immediately spotlights this guy, Caleb.
Caleb is a legend in his own right.
He is. He successfully drives out the 3 sons of Anak from a place called Hebron, exactly as it was promised years earlier. But then Caleb does something kind of strange.
Right.
He points to a city called Kiriath Sepher and puts out this very public challenge. He basically says, he that smites Kiriath Sepher and takes it, to him will I give Achsah, my daughter, to wife.
Which introduces a pretty brilliant strategic move by an aging leader, if you think about it.
But is it, though? Because I have to push back on Caleb's motives here a little bit.
Great, get on me.
Was Caleb just, outsourcing the hard work? Because on the surface, this looks a bit like an exhausted executive delegating the heavy lifting to the unpaid intern so he can just retire in peace.
Well, that is definitely the cynical read, certainly.
Right.
But looking at the broader sociological function, Caleb is actively creating a proving ground. He knows his generation is feeling out, right?
Yeah, Joshua is gone. He's getting older.
Exactly. So he is engineering this high-stakes scenario to see who actually possesses the spiritual and physical boldness to lead when the established guard is gone. He's hunting for a successor.
That is exactly when Othniel steps up.
Right.
The text notes Othniel is Caleb's younger brother, or like a close relative, depending on the translation. And he just takes the city. He completes the mission.
He doesn't hesitate.
No. And his new wife, Achsah, she's just as strategic. The text shows her immediately asking Caleb for a blessing of water springs, the upper and nether springs, which he gives her. This whole family is just wired for decisive action.
Yeah, they don't do things halfway. And Othniel's decision to accept Caleb's challenge is, well, it's the crucial data point here.
How so?
It wasn't just about securing an advantageous marriage or, a nice piece of land. It was a demonstration of capacity.
Oh, wow.
Because we see the massive payoff of this specific decision later in chapter 3. When Israel eventually falls into this huge national crisis and cries out for help, Othniel is the very first judge raised up to rescue them.
The text actually says the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him, he goes to war, defeats the king of Aram, and the land has rest for 40 years.
Exactly. He scales up.
Right. Taking one local city was basically the prerequisite for saving the entire nation.
The underlying mechanism here is that stepping up to immediate, difficult challenges, even when they seem highly localized or personal, that is the training ground for larger influence.
So Othniel proved his character in the micro, which qualified him for the macro.
You hit the nail on the head, yes.
Okay, so Othniel is the gold standard. But here is the massive contradiction in the text that absolutely baffled me as I was reading through the sources.
Oh, the pivot.
The pivot, yes. God just handed Judah a string of incredible victories. I mean, they literally just beat 10,000 men at a place called Besek.
Huge victory.
Huge. But then we hit Judges 1.1 time. The text says the Lord was with Judah, and they drove out the inhabitants of the hill country. But they could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley because they had, quote, chariots of iron.
Ah, yes, the chariots.
I mean, why does their faith suddenly have a technological limit?
Well, the original Hebrew text uses a highly specific, very intimidating term here. It's Rekhev Barzel.
Rekav Barzal.
Yeah, and it carries the heavy weight of absolute cutting-edge military superiority.
I mean, it sounds terrifying. It's like the ancient equivalent of rolling up in an armored tank division against, barefoot infantry.
Right, it's a huge mismatch on paper.
But wait, if they just conquered fortified cities with divine help, why do iron chariots suddenly cancel out that power? Did they just decide it was, more economically convenient to stop fighting?
That is the exact right question to ask.
Because immediately after this, the text details how tribes like Manasseh and Ephraim and Zebulun, they all decided to put the Canaanites to task work, basically forced labor, instead of driving them out as they were instructed to do.
Yeah, you are identifying the exact pivot point
All right.
where theology gives way to economics.
Wow.
It represents the moment human logic and rationalization completely override a foundational commitment.
Right?
The root cause of their failure wasn't actually a military weakness against ancient metallurgy. It was a failure of resolve, dressed up as practicality.
So they looked at the Rekhareth Barzil and said, you know what? Total war is exhausting. Let's just be smart about this and leverage these people for cheap labor.
Exactly. The Canaanites were, as the source notes, resolved to dwell in that land. And Israel, when they became strong enough to actually finish the job, they chose to subjugate them for profit rather than remove them.
So they traded complete victory for economic convenience.
They absolutely did. The chariots of iron were really nothing more than a highly convincing excuse to stop doing the exhausting work of total obedience.
That is so convicting because we do the exact same thing today.
Oh, 100%.
We try to domesticate our demons instead of destroying them. We look at a toxic habit or maybe a compromised value or destructive relationship, and we tell ourselves, well, that's a chariot of iron.
Right. It's just too strong.
Yeah, it's too deeply entrenched to remove.
Mm.
So we just manage the dysfunction. We put it to task work because we get some sort of twisted temporary benefit from it.
And that seems so much easier than the painful process of completely cleaning house.
Exactly. But that choice of convenience over completion leads to a devastating psychological and spiritual confrontation later on.
It really does. The text illustrates the true long-term cost of that compromise in chapter 2 at a place called Bochum.
Which translates to weepers, right?
Yes, weepers. And the angel of the Lord appears there and essentially serves them with a breach of contract notice.
That's a great way to put it.
The angel reminds them, look, God kept his promise, brought you out of Egypt, but you people broke your end of the covenant by making agreements with the inhabitants and failing to break down their altars.
And the consequence is brutal. Because they left these compromises in place, God says those enemies will become snares to them, and their gods will be a trap.
And their reaction to this news is just a masterclass in human cognitive dissonance.
What do you mean?
Well, they lift up their voices and weep loudly, hence the name Bochum. But tears do not equate to transformation.
Right. They are crying, so they clearly feel the weight of their failure. But feeling bad doesn't actually change the reality of the trap they just built for themselves.
No, it doesn't.
They weep, they offer sacrifices, but the cycle immediately begins anyway. The text tells us that generation dies, and the very next generation arises, serves local gods, called the Baals, provokes the Lord, and gets handed over to spoilers.
The mechanism at play here is so vital to understand for anyone trying to build a lasting legacy.
Yeah, break that down for us.
The Baals were local agricultural deities. By leaving the Canaanite altars intact, the Israelites integrated with the very system they were supposed to replace. The text shows that tolerating small compromises inevitably reshapes your entire culture. Partial obedience functions exactly like total disobedience in the long run.
It is like finding a patch of black mold in that massive inherited estate we talked about earlier.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
You decide carrying the drywall out is just, it's too expensive and disruptive, so you just paint over it, you manage it.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Right. But a few years later, the structural integrity of the entire house is compromised.
Exactly. The tears of Bochum are the tears of people who want the catharsis of feeling bad without the friction of changing.
That is so profound. They felt deep remorse, but they lacked the gritty resolve to enact actual reform.
Yeah. And this brings us to the most fascinating transition in the source material. How does this societal rot actually manifest over generations?
Well, it degrades the leaders themselves. God continuously raises up these judges to manage the crises caused by this cycle. But when you compare these later leaders to the boldness of Othniel from the beginning, the decline in character and psychological resilience is staggering.
It is a terrifying progression. The crises become far more complex, and the leaders become increasingly, well, fractured.
Let's look at Gideon, for example.
Let's do it.
He is famous for needing extreme, almost absurd reassurance before he makes a move. He puts a fleece of wool on the ground and asks God to make it wet with dew while the ground is dry.
Which God does.
God does it. But then Gideon basically says, don't be mad, but let's try it one more time. Fleece dry, ground wet.
He requires constant, miraculous validation just to step onto the battlefield.
Right. But to his credit, once he finally gets out there, his tactical brilliance is undeniable.
Oh, absolutely.
He takes an army of just 300 men. He equips them not with swords, but with horns and empty pitchers concealing torches.
Such a wild strategy.
Right. They surround the massive Midianite camp in the dead of night, blow the horns, smash the pitchers, and shout. And the enemy completely panics in the dark and turns their swords on each other.
It is an absolute triumph of psychological warfare. I mean, Gideon demonstrates this profound ability to leverage fear and confusion against a numerically superior force.
But then comes the twist that just ruins his legacy. The Israelites want to make him king. He refuses, playing the humble hero, saying, "The Lord shall rule over you."
Sounds great on paper.
It does. But immediately after that, he asks for the golden earrings from the enemy plunder, and he melts them down to make an ephod.
Which requires some historical context to really understand the gravity of.
Yeah, what exactly is an ephod?
An ephod was traditionally a sacred garment worn by the high priest, often used for divining God's will. It belonged in the central place of worship.
But Gideon makes one out of solid gold and just sets it up in his own hometown of Ophrah.
Yeah, completely bypassing the actual religious structure.
And the text explicitly says all Israel went astray after it there, and it became a snare unto Gideon and to his house.
Wow.
Making that golden ephod is like a wartime general winning the revolution, but then immediately setting up his own rogue shadow government in his basement.
That's exactly what it is.
He saved the nation, but then fractured its loyalty just to feed his own ego.
He was phenomenal at crisis management during a hot war, right? The adrenaline and the clear objective of an external threat, they masks his internal flaws.
Yeah.
But he failed the crisis of peacetime success.
The crisis of peacetime success. Wow.
Yeah, and that is a massive blind spot for leaders today. We spend all our energy training for the launch or the emergency or the battle, but we build zero psychological infrastructure for the boring, quiet reality of maintenance.
Right.
Gideon just lacked the character to lead in times of comfort.
Peacetime success exposing a lack of character. That completely reframes how we look at victory. And the societal rot just continues to spread as we move forward in the text to Jephthah.
Oh, Jephthah.
We go from centralized idolatry under Gideon to horrific internal civil war under Jephthah.
Jephthah represents a highly specialized yet deeply unbalanced leader.
The contrast in his behavior is just jarring. Because when the Ammonites attack Israel, Jephthah sends messengers to their king. He doesn't just threaten them, he constructs this razor-sharp diplomatic letter.
He's actually very articulate.
He argues land rights using history and theology. He tells the king, look, your god Chemosh gave you your territory, right? Well, the Lord our God dispossessed the Amorites for us. We are keeping what our God gave us.
Yeah, it is an incredibly rational argument.
It really is.
He is a highly skilled negotiator who really understands international politics and theological boundaries. But his intellectual capability makes his subsequent moral bankruptcy even more shocking.
Right.
He can debate a foreign king to a standstill, but he utterly fails to govern his own people.
Because the Ephraimites, his fellow Israelites, complained bitterly that Jephthah didn't invite them to the battle against Ammon so they could share the glory.
Typical tribal politics.
Exactly. But instead of de-escalating, Jephthah's forces just take the crossing points of the Jordan River. And this leads to one of the darkest linguistic quirks in human history, the shibboleth incident.
It is a chilling demonstration of how quickly an in-group will weaponize minor differences.
So the source notes that when a fugitive tried to cross the river, Jephthah's men would ask, "Art thou an Ephraimite?" If the guy said no, they would make him say the Hebrew word shibboleth, which means an ear of grain or a flowing stream.
Right.
But the Ephraimites had a different regional dialect. They couldn't pronounce the sh sound. The text says he could not frame to pronounce it right, so he would say Sibboleth.
Sibboleth, yeah.
That single slight phonetic mispronunciation was literally a death sentence. 42,000 Ephraimites were slaughtered at the river.
Just dig into the psychology of that moment for a second. They are no longer fighting the Canaanites. They aren't worried about the chariots of iron at all.
Yeah.
They are systematically slaughtering their own relatives over an accent.
It's insane.
When a group loses its unifying external purpose, it doesn't just sit peacefully, it turns inward. It invents arbitrary internal metrics of purity just to have someone to fight.
It is ancient cancel culture taken to a homicidal extreme. Narcissism and tribalism completely overriding shared identity.
Exactly. Jephthah had diplomatic grace for his enemies, but zero grace for his allies, which of course sets the stage for the final and perhaps most tragic figure in our sources.
Samson.
The fragmentation goes from the national level with Gideon to the tribal level with Jephthah, straight down to the individual level with Samson.
Samson takes this societal breakdown to its absolute limit. He can't even govern his own mind.
No, he can't.
He is capable of immense supernatural physical feats against the Philistines, but internally, he is an infant, entirely governed by his base impulses.
Samson's story is often reduced to a fable about magic hair, right?
Yeah, that's what everyone remembers.
But the actual mechanics of his failure are rooted in a breached contract. Samson was under a Nazirite vow from birth.
And what does that actually entail structurally?
A Nazirite vow was a strict physical dedication to God. It involved absolute rules, like no consuming alcohol or grape products, no touching dead bodies, and no cutting of the hair.
Okay.
So the uncut hair wasn't a magic talisman. It was the visible, physical manifestation of a spiritual covenant.
Which makes his relationship with Delilah so much darker.
Oh, absolutely.
She repeatedly tries to betray him to the Philistines, and he just keeps playing this arrogant game with her. Finally, he tells her the actual secret of his strength, his Nazirite dedication, and she shaves his head while he sleeps.
When he allowed Delilah to cut his hair, he wasn't just being careless, he was consciously abandoning the final clause of his covenant.
Because he had already broken the other rules, right?
Exactly. He had already broken the rules about dead bodies and alcohol earlier in his life. The hair was the last thread of his spiritual infrastructure.
And the result is horrifying. The Philistines capture him, brutally gouge out his eyes, bind him in brass fetters, and the text says he did grind in the prison house.
It's just devastating.
He becomes a literal beast of burden walking in circles. The ultimate tragedy of potential. Supernatural physical strength paired with absolute zero self-mastery.
Samson is the physical embodiment of Israel's condition at the end of this era.
That makes perfect sense.
Given incredible divine potential, but repeatedly wandering into enemy territory to chase immediate gratification, true leadership requires deep-rooted, consistent character. Talent, charisma, and crisis mode adrenaline are completely insufficient substitutes.
Looking back over this entire deep dive, the trajectory is just devastating.
Yeah.
We started with the solid foundation of Caleb and Othniel, leaders who met challenges head on and secured their inheritance.
Right.
But that inheritance eroded the exact moment the generation after them let the chariots of iron become a convenient excuse for compromise. They chose the trap of economic leverage over the hard work of total victory.
Which led to the empty tears at Bochum. Remorse without repentance.
Exactly. And from there, the decay is exponential. You get leaders who win public battles but lose their own souls like Gideon. Leaders who slaughter their own brothers over a mispronounced word like Jephthah.
And leaders who end up blinded and bound in an enemy prison like Samson.
It all traces back to that very first seemingly rational decision to tolerate the things they were instructed to eliminate.
Yeah.
Which brings us all the way back to you, the listener. We are all inheriting a landscape right now. Your career, your family dynamics, your own mental habits. You are the one holding the keys to the estate.
So are you going to do the exhausting work of clearing out the rot? Or are you going to paint over the mold and pretend the house isn't slowly collapsing?
Take a brutal inventory of your life today. What are the chariots of iron you have convinced yourself are just too deeply entrenched to defeat? Are they genuinely impossible obstacles? Or have you just found it more comfortable to put them to work and live with the dysfunction?
That's the real question.
The text is clear. The things we refuse to conquer will eventually conquer us. It is time to tear down those altars.
Absolutely.
But as you look at the altars in your own life, ask yourself this one final question. If you do muster the courage to tear them down, what exactly are you going to build in the empty space they leave behind? Because as this history painfully demonstrates, nature abhors a vacuum. An empty room in your life rarely stays empty for long.